Vande Mataram. Now, today we are in a pandemic of COVID-19, and more than that pandemic, right now we are facing an epidemic of webinars. So, people are confused what should be the webinar, what they should be watching. So, the Law Club has designed such lectures which can be of reference to everyone, not only as an academic thing, but also in day-to-day life. And today I will be speaking on 138. I will be pointing out how we have lacked in the system and how we have misguided ourselves to have a system wherein we have a prolonged system of 138. Now, what basically we do in 138? This is I'm talking about a general. There may be some courts which have some different concepts, etc. So basically, you draft a 138 complaint. You then go a form, or you get yourself notarized. The complaint copy is notarized. Then you file it. After that, the department may give you objections, or it is put in the computer section. You have to wait for a day or two, or you are given a date.
अरे यार sorry some issues.
The verification is done under section 200 of the uh, CRPC and then 200 not 2. In between, you are asked to file an affidavit which says that there are no other case which is filed with regard to the current checks. Then you collect the summons, you send them the summons, the accused does not come, then you apply for warrants, and when C is there, then you file your evidence, serve the other side, then the other side puts in say. At times, magistrates will also have exhibiting of the documents, etc. done, and then cross-examination in which you have to explain the entire transaction process with regard to that also. And then you have the accused coming under 313. In between, if there is no cross-examination order, then they apply under 311, and a period of 1 year goes here there, and then the accused evidence cross-examination, and then finally, after years, if the order comes. Now, what that order is, basically that order, not a single order will give you the reason for the order. The maximum prescribed punishment per check is 1 year. They will give 6 months, 3 months, lump sum amount of compensation, no justification. Only an order stating the facts and an order which will go back to the trial. It will go whether your transaction was there or not, whether you proved your transaction or not. Now, all these things, in between, you leave out section 145(2), which is a crucial aspect of 138 for the purpose of cross-examination. Now, let us understand, see what is the provisions. I know most of you must be knowing the Act. Let us see what are the provisions of the Act, and therefore I'll have to share my screen to show you the provisions of the Act. Neeraj, is the screen visible to you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now we will see first from section 138, and I'll go to various aspects of section of the NI Act. Now, if you see the 138, it talks about the dishonor of check. The word uses check and not checks for insufficient etc. of funds in the accounts. So if you see this entire section, it talks about any check. It doesn't talk about checks. So when we are doing trial right now, we come across trials where we have filed cases for 5 checks, 7 checks, 10 checks, and the punishment is 6 months, 1 year, which itself makes the mockery of law because the Act doesn't provide for a complaint. It doesn't say per complaint this is the punishment. It says per check. So if you see the screen, which is where any check drawn by a person on an account maintained by him with a banker for payment of any amount of money to another person from out of that account for discharge in whole or in part of any debt or any liability, other liability is returned by the bank unpaid, either because of the amount of money standing to the credit of that account is insufficient to honor the check. Again, the word is check, not checks, or that it exceeds the amount arranged to be paid from the account of an agreement made with that bank, such person shall be deemed to have committed an offence and shall, without prejudice to any other provision of the Act, be punished for imprisonment for a term which may exceed up to 2 years, or with fine which may exceed twice the amount of the check. Now, here again the word is check, or with both. So, there are 3 conditions which are prescribed for any offence under 138. The provisions are 138A, B, and C. Now what it says is that the check has to be presented to the bank within 6 months. Now there is a lacuna right now. The validity of the check is 3 months. So you have to present that. Then B says that you have to give a notice in writing to the person calling upon him to pay the amount of the check. Now that B doesn't say a lawyer's notice. It says simply a demand of payment has to be made. So it can be a simple trader can also record that your check number so and so, dated so and so, for rupees so and so, drawn on this bank, has been returned unpaid for reason so and so. I request you to make the payment of the said amount within a period of 15 days. So the prescribed period is 15 days and the notice has to be sent within 30 days. And the drawer has to fail, should not have made the payment. So these three conditions, once it is satisfied, the offense is deemed to have been committed. Now 138(9), there is a presumption of law which talks about that it is assumed that there is an offense unless, the word they use is unless contrary is proved. Now who will prove that contrary? The accused has to prove that contrary. I as a complainant will not step into the witness box and contradict my own self. So there are only two methods of contradicting, or you can say the disproving method, or whatever word you may use, that this is contrary. So one method is by cross-examining the complainant, and second by stepping into the witness box and proving that you are not guilty. Now the other section which is important is section 141, which is in relation to partnership firms and which is in relation to companies. What has been happening recently is that in case of companies, people come up with a case that I am a nominated director, I am a nominee director, I am an independent director. But if you see, or if it is a partnership firm, they come up with a plea that I am a sleeping partner. But the exemption, if you read carefully, states as under, provided further there where person is nominated as director of a company by virtue of his holding any office or employment in the central government or state government or financial corporation owned or controlled by the central government or state government, as the case may be. So merely because you are a nominal director, you are a nominated director, you are independent director, there is presumption still against you. It is only if you are a director by virtue of holding an office. So suppose I have taken loan from HDFC Bank Limited, I have taken from State Bank of India, and the loan is used, and therefore State Bank nominates one of its office bearers to be as director of the company, to watch over the board of directors and keep a track of what we are doing. Then it is a different issue. Otherwise, this provision will not come to the aid. So usually what we see is that these revision applications or the 482 application goes, and magistrates generally have a tendency to stay it or to grant time and have the hearings done. Basically, the magistrate only has to see whether he is a nominated director or not. He has to file with the application that, look here, I am a nominated director by virtue of holding an employment with the central government or state government. Now, thereafter, the important aspect which I wish to highlight is the provisions of section 142. Now, 142A relates to the transfer of the certain matters. Now, this was brought in because there used to be several matters based on the Roopchand Rathod judgment, where the Supreme Court said, no, the jurisdiction will lie where the accused resides. So when this amendment was made, there is section 142(3). That is to say that if there is more than one prosecution filed by the payee or the holder in due course, then against the same drawer of the checks is pending before different courts. Then upon the said fact, now it doesn't say application, upon the said fact having been brought to the notice of the court, such court shall transfer the case to the court having jurisdiction as per 145-42, before which the first case was instituted. So therefore, you will find that the magistrates may tell you that you apply to the CMM, you go to the in charge court, you get the order there, which is not so. And it doesn't talk about an application. It talks about the fact being brought to the knowledge of the court. So the fact can be brought orally also. The fact can also be there by way of the complaint having that pleading. I write that earlier reference case so and so is also pending. So with regard to that, if such case is pending, that magistrate is duty bound to transfer the case to the first court. So wherever there are three cases, wherever the first case was instituted, it will go there. Now, the trial has been prescribed, which is under 143. The power of the court to try summarily. Now let us understand what summary trial is. Summary trial is a very brief system where the basic idea is that you are assuming that the accused is guilty. You give an opportunity to the accused to disprove the case or to make out a case that possibility of there being another story is in existence, and therefore the court has to consider that and allow the cross-examination, etc. Without the same, this provision says that you have to run the show as per 262 to 265, both included. And here, 262 to 265 of CRPC only provides for punishment of up to 6 months. So if you read carefully, that 143 clearly provides that in case of summary trial, it has to be maximum imprisonment of 1 year. So what 2 years is talked about is if it is not a summary trial. And if it is a summary trial, then the idea is 5,000 rupees fine and maximum 1 year imprisonment. If you see the provision, it clearly says that provided that in case of any conviction in summary trial under this section, it shall be lawful for the magistrate to pass a sentence of imprisonment for a term not exceeding 1 year and an amount of fine exceeding rupees 5,000. Let me be very clear, there is no provision of compensation over here. So it says that if it is a summary trial, the fine will be 5,000 only, and out of that fine, the court can give the compensation. And second, it says that the punishment can be 1 year. But if there is any case which is made out which excludes that thing, then there is no need. Now let us see one more provision of the Act, which is section 80. The screen is getting distorted because of some reason. Let us see section 80 of NI Act. Now section 80 says interest when rate specified, rate not specified. So as per the law, if there is no specified rate, which generally is not, the compensation or the check has to be with an interest of 18% per annum. Now, let us understand that with two case laws, which we will be pointing out, which is first case which I will be pointing out is the Indian Banking Association judgment versus Union of India. The screen is distorted because of that lines. I'm sorry about it. This judgment was in writ petition number civil number 18 of 2013 passed by the Supreme Court. Now, the important paragraphs which I would like to highlight is para 14. I hope it is visible on the screen. Yes. So it is visible. Neeraj, is it visible? Hello?
No, sir.
Yeah. So what the court said in para 14 was considerable time is usually spent for recording of the statement of the complaint.
It says not visible.
Okay. I will again start sharing the screen. Now is it visible?
Hello, it's not
Yes, sir.
visible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So now the Supreme Court, I'll again go back to the citation so that you have the perfect idea of the citation. The citation is Indian Banking Association and others versus Union of India and others. This is in writ petition civil number 18 of 2013, decided on 21st April 2014 by Honorable Supreme Court. Now, the important points of this judgment was a watershed and it has laid down how the judiciary has to operate, but unfortunately this judgment is totally violated. what the Supreme Court said in paragraph 14 was that I have marked in green. I am sure everybody will be able to see it in green. The question is whether the court can dispense with the appearance of the complainant, instead to take steps to accept the affidavit of the complainant and treat the same as examination in chief. Section 145(1) gives complete freedom to the complainant either to give his evidence by way of affidavit or by way of oral evidence. The court has to accept the same even if it is given by way of an affidavit. Second part of 145(1) provides that the complainant's statement on affidavit may, subject to all exceptions, be read in evidence in any inquiry, trial or other proceedings. Now, basically what happens today is that generally the complainant is asked to come to court. The magistrate will say, where is the complainant? But if you read carefully, the Supreme Court has said that the question is whether the complainant can be dispensed with. So technically, if you read this entire paragraph, it is very clear that there is no need of the complainant to remain present. He can file the complaint along with affidavit, and he has an option to give oral evidence or written evidence. So it is not even mandatory that no, you have to give it in writing. You can have a oral evidence wherein the questions are put up and the witness can answer it. So it clearly says that Section 145 is a rule of procedure which lays down the manner in which evidence of the complainant may be recorded, and once the court issues summons and the presence of the accused is secured, an option be given to the accused whether at the stage he would be willing to pay the amount due along with reasonable interest. And if the accused is not willing to pay, court may fix the case at an early date and ensure day-to-day trial. Now, two parts are very important. It says reasonable interest. Now, I have shown Section 80 clearly says that wherever there is no interest provided, it is deemed to be 18%. So, if the 18%, so now when the complaint is to be filed, it has to be by, suppose I file it with the affidavit which is notarized, there is no need of the complaint to come to court. The complainant is dispensed with and the summons are issued to the accused. The accused comes forward, the court asks him, look here, do you want to pay the amount with the interest? If he agrees, then the trial gets over, the trial doesn't start. If he doesn't agree, then the court has to fix an early date and ensure day-to-day trial. Now, unfortunately, what happens in our judiciary, especially Mumbai, Delhi, Calcutta, whatever, Daman, etc., I am saying, is that they have a system of giving longer dates, which is in violation of this act. Now, it then comes forward to say what is summary trial. Section 143 empowers, if you see para 15, Section 143 empowers the court to try the case for dishonor checks summarily in accordance with the provision of Section 262 to 265 of Code of Criminal Procedure 1973. The relevant provisions of Section 262 to 264 are extracted herein below for easy reference. Procedure for summary trial. In trial under this chapter, the procedure specified in this code for trial summarized shall be followed except as herein after mentioned. No sentence of imprisonment for a term exceeding 3 months shall be passed in case of any conviction under this chapter. But this has been clarified in the NIR to mean 1 year. In every case, trial summary, the magistrate shall enter in such form as the state may direct the following particulars, namely the serial number of the case, the date of commission of the offence, the date of the report of complaint, the name of the complainant, the name, percentage and residence of the accused, the offence, complaint of and offence if any proved, and in case coming under clause 2, 3, 4 of subsection 1 to 60, the value of the property in respect of which the offence is committed, the plea of the accused and his examination, if any. This is important, if any. The finding, the sentence or other, I'm sorry, I have skipped. The finding, the sentence or other final order, the date on which proceeding terminated, the judgment. Now, if you see carefully, the serial number of the case, the date of offence. Now, the date of offence is the 15th day of the service of notice. So, if the check is returned on 10th May, notice issued on 31st May, The notice is served on 4th June. Then 19th June, 12 o'clock, 1 minute, the offense occurs. Now, even if you pay the amount next day morning, if the offense has occurred, so in that case, at the most, there can be leniency. So the offense committed, the date of report of complaint. So when did you file it? Now, percentage, name, percentage, residence of the accused. So is that there are 3 accused. So you have the name and the residence areas of the accused. And then the plea of the accused. Now, what basically the judiciary is doing in this 138, we have 2 pleas. One is when the accused comes for bail bond, that time we have the plea recorded. And further, when the accused, after the complainant's evidence is over, he records plea under 313. So technically, there is no provision of 313 in the summary trial. The provision of 313 would lie because it was framed, because what happens in regular trial is that you have a complaint, FIR, then the charge sheet is filed. In the charge sheet, there are witnesses, and after that witnesses, the cross-examination goes, and then you ask your the accused, why so and so is also deposing against you. So the purpose is because he did not know who is going to give the evidence against him. Here the evidence is prior. So when you file a complaint, you are already given the evidence. So therefore, there is no question of having this evidence again. So basically, the purpose is to have summary trial wherein the accused gets the notice and accused is asked to step into the witness box, and then the trial goes on. Now, what the further the court says? Section para 16. Is it clear? The screen is clear? Neeraj Kabra ji, is it?
Yes, sir. Yes, it's clear. It's clear.
Yeah. We have indicated that under section 145 of the Act, the complainant can give his evidence by way of an affidavit, and such affidavit shall be read in evidence in any inquiry, trial, or proceedings in the court, which makes it clear that a complainant is not required to examine himself twice, i.e. one after the filing of the complaint and one after summoning of the accused. Affidavit and the documents filed by the complainant along with the complaint for taking cognizance of the offense are good enough to be read in evidence at both stages, i.e. pre-summoning stage and the post-summoning stage. In other words, there is no necessity to recall and re-examine the complainant after summoning the accused unless the magistrate passes, the important word is a specific order, and important word as to why the complainant is recalled. Such an order is to be passed on an application made by the accused or under 145(2) of the Act suo motu by the court. Okay, so basically what the court has said is that once you have filed the complaint along with the documents and along with the affidavit, there is no need of further examination. So you need not file an application affidavit in lieu of section 200, 202, and then have the summons issued. It is says the moment it is filed, this affidavit is valid for even inquiry. So 202 is an inquiry. So 200, 202, whatever you want, that is there, and you need not examine the witness twice. So today what happens is that the moment you file complaint, the accused complainant is asked to step into the witness box. The magistrate or the JC will ask 3, 4, 5 questions as they deem fit and proper. And then what they do is post-summoning. They again will ask the moment the accused comes, the bail is granted, they will say, no, step into the witness box for cross-examination, which is not there. So court has very clearly said, in other words, there is no necessity to recall or re-examine the complainant after summoning the accused unless the magistrate passes a very specific order. And second word is why the complainant is recalled. Now this has to be under section 145(2) of the Act, either by court or the accused has to make out a case. Now merely what we see in courts is, in the interest of justice, the application be allowed, or I have a very good case on merits and therefore it be allowed. Now that is not the case. Under 145(2), you have to make out a very specific case why you could not have committed the offense and for reasons and defenses. It can be that you have paid later on. It can be that the goods were never supplied. It was only on purchase order and this was an advance check. So all such things either you have to make out under 145(2) or prima facie on the documents the magistrate feels no, he requires to be recalled. So it has to be specific order, not a general order, and reasoned. Proper reason has to be given why he has been recalled. Otherwise, there is no provision of cross-examination. Very unfortunately, our magistrates are either treating it very casually, they allow cross-examination, or at the most, they will say, oh, it's a formality, write it, I will allow. In fact, I have seen that they do not even allow the say of the advocate of the complaint, which is totally faulty. I may be on the side of accused. I may be happy, oh, I have gone through this, now I will get a relief. But ultimately, there is murder of law. And when society as a whole has to survive, law has to be there. You may switch over the side from complainant to accused, accused to complainant. But as a lawyer, you have a duty towards the field of law. You have a duty towards court. You have a duty towards constitution. So you have to remember that it is not merely for asking that the accused can be complaint can be recalled. Now the court goes further. Such an order, my cursor is there, okay? Such an order is passed on an application made by so and so. This is finished. Then is made a suo motu by so and so. In summary trial, after the accused is summoned, his plea is to be recorded under section 263G CRPC. Now, not the regular plea. 263G CRPC and his examination, if any, can be done by a magistrate. So, the examination is not of the accused, a complainant, it is of the accused, because 139 presumes that the accused is guilty, so he can examine him, if any, done by the magistrate, and a finding can be given by the court under section 263H of CRPC. And the same procedure can be followed by a magistrate for offense of dishonor check, since the offense under 138 of the Act is a document-based offense. We make it clear that if the provision of proviso A, B, and C to 138 of the Act are shown to have been complied with, technically the commission of the offense stands completed, and it is for the accused to show that no offense could have been committed by him for specific reasons and defenses. So even the 145(2) will have specific reasons and defenses. He cannot merely say, I have a good case, or that the goods were not supplied, or he merely say that the transaction is disputed, or he merely says this was a security check. So he has to make out a case, and even when he stands into the witness box for his defense, it is his onus to put that he could not have committed the offense for reasons and defenses. Now the Supreme Court went further in section 7, para 17 to point out that how summary case is to be done. I am on para 13 right now, internal para 13. The manner in which the record in summary trials is to be maintained is provided in section 263 of the code. Section 264 mentions that in every case tried summarily in which the accused does not plead guilty, the magistrate shall record the substance of the evidence and a judgment containing a brief statement of reasons of finding. Thus, a magistrate is not expected to record full evidence which he would have been otherwise required to record in a regular trial, and his judgment should also contain a brief statement of reasons for finding and not elaborate reasons which otherwise he would be required to record in regular trial. Now, this was done in the case of Nitin by Sevatilal Shah and another versus Manu by Panchal, which is reported judgment of 2011 9 SCC 638. Now, the principle therein has been reiterated over here. Now, the Supreme Court then goes on. The Supreme Court realizes that, look here, our system is totally faulty. So, Supreme Court passes directions. Now, what are these directions? There are in all 5 directions which are passed. The Supreme Court says MM, Judicial Magistrate. Now, MM, I'll explain for some of you who may not be knowing. In metropolitan cities, we have Metropolitan Magistrate. Everywhere it is Judicial Magistrate. It can be first class, second class. So, these are terminologies. So, whichever court has jurisdiction. On the day when the complaint under 138 Act is presented, so I have already explained that the need of complainant is not required as per Supreme Court. with utmost respect, every magistrate, we have been fighting with every magistrate, but they are not willing to understand. And in fact, all these matters, we have around 40 writ petitions which are pending against the same things. So the presence of complainant is not required. It can be a notarized copy also. It clearly says that on the date it is presented, shall scrutinize the complaint. And if the complaint is accompanied by affidavit, and the affidavit and the documents, if any, are found in order, take cognizance and direct issuance of summons. Supreme Court did not give them 2 days time. Supreme Court did not say that no, for verification, you have to keep it for verification. Supreme Court did not say that no, you have to call the complainant. Supreme Court merely says, moment it is presented, you have to scrutinize. So remove the objections. Suppose you find something is missing, the check is missing, or the memo is not clear, please scrutinize. And if the complaint is accompanied by affidavit, and the affidavit and the documents, if any. Now here is a catch. It does not say the original documents. It says only the documents. So here, many magistrates are insisting on originals. Some magistrates say, no, what will happen if the documents are lost? We will not be liable. You record that I am not liable. So this, the Supreme Court did not say it has to be original. Basic concept, it has to be that you present the complaint with the documents and you carry the originals. The magistrates, if they want, they can immediately verify the originals and put a stamp verified. You have to give, the lawyer has to put in, what we do is verified with the originals and we sign it. So that can be there, or the magistrate can ask the JC and verify each and every document, put a stamp and say original return to the complainant. Because today is the concept of photocopying and not typing. So there is no need of us to present the original. There is no need of us to carry it all the time. The magistrate can verify the documents, and if it is found in order, he has to take cognizance. He cannot say tomorrow morning. He has to take cognizance and direct issuance of summons. Now then it says, Metropolitan Magistrate, Judicial Magistrate should adopt a pragmatic and realistic approach while issuing summons. Summons must be properly addressed and sent by post as well as by email address got from the complainant. This is very important. This I will also highlight when I read the next judgment, what Supreme Court has said later on. So email, if you have given, the court has to send it by. It doesn't say that the complainant should be given the packet. It says summons must be properly numbered and sent by post as well as email. So court has to send it by email. Court has to send it by post. Court in appropriate proceedings may take assistance of the police or the nearby courts to serve the notice to the accused. So kindly see the word, the court inappropriate. It doesn't say the court in court with the help of the complaint advocate for the complaint. The court itself has to take pragmatic and realistic approach. It finds that the address is such where you have to send the police, where you have to send the nearby court. For example, Jilla is there, Taluka is there. The court can always have the summons sent through this police or the nearest by court, and email has to be sent. Now, if you see, most of the courts do not have their email IDs. If they have, for example, we have Andheri Court, Mumbai, they have their email ID, which is Gmail based. Gmail based email are not recognized. It has to be nic.in or gov.in. And I think Judiciary has also come out with a new email ID, judiciary.in or something like that. For notice of appearance, a short date may be fixed. If the summons is received back unserved, immediate follow-up action is to be taken. Now, short date is to be given. Today, what we see is that the magistrates have the tendency to give it a longer date, and when you confront them, they will say, we are overloaded. It is not that the Supreme Court did not know. The Supreme Court realized that the same work is to be done. If you give after 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, the same system will continue. The work will be same. Only thing is that you postpone your duties. The court said, no, you have to give it a short date. The court then further goes, court may indicate in the summons that if the accused makes an application for compounding of the offense at first hearing of the case, and if such an application is made, court may pass appropriate orders at the earliest. So if you see right now, the summons has on the backside the 10% clause, which was the earlier judgment, wherein stage was it was determined that if you give at the trial stage, it will be 10%, then further 20, 30, etc. Now this court clearly states that earlier it said reasonable interest, then it says that may indicate It doesn't say repeat that paragraph. It says may indicate that if the accused makes the application for compounding of the offense at first hearing, then court may pass appropriate orders. This has been further elaborated in Meter judgment, which I will deal with later. Then the court says that the court should direct the accused when he appears to furnish a bail bond to ensure his appearance during trial and ask him to take notice under 251 CRPC to enable him to enter his plea of defense and fix the case for defense evidence unless an application is made by the accused under 145(2) for recalling a witness for cross-examination. Now today what happens is no such application is made. When you point out, the court will say you apply. So you make an application under that stating that look here, there is no application under 145(2). Therefore, please pass issue or application notice under 251 CRPC. And the moment it is done, the accused advocate will take time. He will file a take time for reply. Then he will file a 145(2) application, and the court will say, look, it's there. But here it says the court should direct the accused when he appears to furnish the bail bond. So on day one, the lower court has been given the duty to direct the accused when he appears for bail bond to ensure his appearance during trial and ask him to take notice under 251 CRPC to enter his defense. And he has to move the moment he goes, he applies for bail. Along with that, he has to make an application for 145(2). It cannot be at a later stage. Now, what it says, the court concerned must ensure that examination in chief, cross-examination. Examination is chief when you file a complaint. Cross-examination of the complaint must be conducted with and on the basis of document. Accused may have produced certain documents or certain facts which requires additional documents. So here, the moment the accused has made a the case under 145 to the moment comes over, they assume there is no re-examination. No cross-examination copy is given to the advocate. Now, unless the advocate can reach the cross-examination, how can he conclude that I require to re-examine? So basically, this lacuna is there in the judiciary. It is very unfortunate that they do not follow the directions of the Supreme Court. Now, later on in that paragraph, the Supreme Court has directed that all criminal courts in the country dealing with Section 138 cases to follow the above mentioned procedures for speedy and expeditious disposal of the cases following under 138 of the Negotiable Instrument Act. So Supreme Court has elaborated, has detailed, has given guidelines, has created a system where the complainant is not required. You can file the case, have the process summons issued same day. You can go through police station. So if the summons is given on the same day, you can go and lodge it in 2 days, 3 days, and 15 days, 30 days, accused can remain present. But today we say, oh, we are lacking infrastructure. We are overloaded. So this will go ahead. So that system of 6 months continues as it is. Now, next came, in fact, we have recorded several letters and we have succeeded there. We have recorded complaints against magistrates for not following the law. What they do generally is that they allow the witness to be cross-examined. One more aspect comes here is Section 311. 311, what they do is they are not conducting summary trial, and even if 145(2) is not made out, the order is passed, 251. They write no cross-examination, which is not right. The court has not rejected the cross-examination application. The court has issued notice under 251. So the order of no cross-examination is not required. Then it goes on to say, power 311, you make an application and the accused complainant is recalled. Suo motu stating 311 application is made, therefore we are allowing it. These are not technically correct things which the magistrates are following. What it says 311, any court may at any stage of inquiry, trial or other proceeding under this code summon any person as a witness or examine any person in attendance, though not summoned as a witness, or recall or re-examine any person already examined, and the court shall summon and examine or recall and re-examine any such person if his evidence appears to it to be essential to the just decision of the case. It doesn't say that it has to be just on asking. It says it is essential to just decision of the case. In fact, in summary trial, 260 to 265, there is no applicability of 311. If X has been examined, Y has been examined, Z has been examined, and court feels now X and Y statements are contradictory, and I need to recall, then this section is applicable. It does not say that when the order is passed of no cross-examination, the witness can be recalled. It does not say that it is a second chance of examining. It says that if it is essential, it says that he has to be re-examined. So when the earlier examination was not allowed because of fault of accused, this section should not apply, and more so, one will not apply. Now, which is also by Supreme Court, which is Messrs. Meters and Instrument Private Limited and another versus Kanchan Mehta. There are several criminal appeal numbers which are pointed out. I request that the mics be switched off because it's creating disturbance. Neeraj Kabra, to ensure that whoever's mic is there, please switch it off or remove him. So,
Yes, sir.
this judgment was passed on 5th October 2017. Now I go to the para 7 of the judgment. It clearly says that this court has noted that the the court on how to have the 138 proceedings made simpler, made faster, made more effective. So it says this court has noted that the object of the statute was to facilitate smooth functioning of the business transaction. The provision is necessary as in many transactions, checks were issued merely as a device to default the creditors. Dishonor of the check. I have a request, please switch off the mics because it's, thank you very much. In any transaction was issued merely as a device to defraud the creditors. Dishonor of the check. Please switch off the mics. Please, I request. Neeraj Kabra, please remove the person whose mics are on.
Yes, sir.
So that person is removed now. Okay. I have removed him.
The
Yes.
provision should be as a device to defraud the creditors. Transactions $7. Act is also noted that the nature of offense under section 138 primarily related to civil wrong, and the 2002 amendment specifically made it compoundable. The offense was also described as a regulatory offense. The burden of proof was on the accused in view of presumption under section 139, and the standard of proof was preponderance of the probabilities. The object of the provision was described as both punitive as well as compensatory. I hope everyone sees screen. The intention of the provision was to providing for punishment with imprisonment or with fine, which could extend to twice the amount of the check or both, made the intention of law very clear. The complainant could not be given only the check amount, but double the amount so as to cover the interest and cost. 357(1)(b) of the CRPC provides for payment of compensation for loss caused for offense out of the fine. Where the fine is imposed, compensation can be awarded under 357(3) CRPC to the person who suffers the loss. Now here is the catch. The Supreme Court has said out of the fine here, you can be given the compensation. So if the summary trial is done, the fine is 5,000, so you cannot be given the double the amount. Sentence in default can be imposed. The provision is not merely penal, but to make accused honor the negotiable instruments. Now, Supreme Court in the same judgment, para 16, has further elaborated that it is thus clear that the trials under this chapter 17 of the Act are expected normally to be summary trial. Now, if you go and see your cases, these are not run as summary trial. They put in the number as SS, but they don't do it as a summary trial. In fact, it should be ST. Once the complaint is filed, which is accompanied by dishonor check and the bank slip and the affidavit, the court ought to issue summons. The service of the summons can be by post, email, courier, and ought to be probably monitored. So here the Supreme Court has gone to the extent of removing the necessity of post only. It says can be by post, option of email, then option of courier. So if you are somebody is not the address is not traceable. Suppose it's a company, you realize that there is an email ID, you send an email ID summon, it is deemed served. The summon ought to indicate that the accused could make a specified payment by depositing a particular amount before the specified date and inform the court and the complainant by email. So the email ID of the court as well as the complainant is required as per this judgment. In such a situation, he may not be required to appear if the court is satisfied that the payment has been duly made and if the complainant has no valid objection. So here what the court says is that suppose the check amount is 10,000 rupees. You reasonably assess the interest at the rate 18%. You reasonably assess this cost, which you may assess 4,000, 5,000. And if that amount is paid and an email is sent, so the amount is paid to the account of the complainant. Now that account number has to be detailed in every complaint. Most lawyers do not give the details. So Supreme Court has clearly stated that you have to give the account number, and if that email is there, that look here, I have paid this amount, then generally the accused is not required to pay. His statement ought to be recorded forthwith and the case is fixed for defense affidavit. And if the accused is required to appear, now suppose he has given a less amount, then his statement is to be recorded forthwith and case is fixed for defense evidence unless complaint witnesses are recalled for examination. That is under 145(2). Having regard to the magnitude of challenge posed by the cases filed under section 138 of the Act, which constitute about 20% of the total number of cases filed in courts, and earlier direction of this court, in this regard, it appears to be necessary that the situation is reviewed by high courts and updated directions are issued. Interaction action plans and monitoring are continuing steps mandated under Article 39A and 21 of the Constitution to achieve the goal of access to justice. Use of modern technology needs to be considered not only for paperless court, but also reduce overcrowding of the courts. Now, under COVID-19, we forget overcrowding. We do not want people to come to court. There appears to be need to consider categorizing of the case, which can be partly or entirely concluded online without physical presence of the parties by simplifying procedures where seriously disputed questions are not required to be adjudicated. Traffic challans may be perhaps one of the categories. At least some number of 138 cases can be decided online. If complaint with affidavit and documents can be filed online, process issued online, and accusers pays the amount online, it obviates the need of personal appearance of the complainant or accused. Only if the accused contests, need for the appearance of parties may arise, not only will arise, it says may arise, which may be through counsel or wherever viable video conferencing can be used. Personal appearance can be dispensed with on suitable self-operating conditions. This is a matter to be considered by high courts and wherever viable appropriate direction be issued. So what the Supreme Court says is, it clearly says that at least some number of cases you may specify below 1 crore of 50 lakhs, depending upon the state high courts have been empowered. You have it e-filing You need not appear, accused need not appear, and even if there is a requirement, they can appear through their counsels and wherever viable through video conferencing. Metropolitan magistrates. Now in Mumbai, we are the financial capital, and Delhi is the capital, of Calcutta is a big financial city. What is, we have how many courts? Maybe 50 courts. So video conferencing in such courts, be it Mumbai, Pune, Delhi, Calcutta, Chennai, Bangalore, can be done. I can understand if it is, say for example, a lower court where it's a JMFC in Daman. You can say that, okay, we do not have the e-filing system, we do not have the video conferencing system, but basically the metropolitan magistrates and these cities, second-run cities, also should follow this judgment. One, they should have their email ID. Accused email ID should be there. The account details of the complainant should be there to facilitate smooth transactions. And in fact, if it is done, I am sure 30-40% cases will end immediately. Then the court in para 18 says, from the above discussions, following aspects emerge. Offense under section 138 is primarily a civil wrong. Burden of proof is on accused in view of presumption under section 139. But the standard of such proof is preponderance of probabilities. The same has to be normally tried summarily as per provisions of summary trial under CRPC, but with such variations as may be appropriate to the proceeding under chapter 17 of the Act. Thus, read principle of section 258 CRPC will apply, and the court can close proceedings and discharge accused on satisfaction that the check amount with assessed costs and interest, and if there is no reason to proceed with punitive aspect. So court has clearly stated that there is a compounding provision under 258 CRPC. So moment the check amount with assessed costs and interest is paid, compounding has to be done. Then the court goes on in Roman para 4. Procedure of trial under chapter 17 of the Act has normally to be summary. The discretion of magistrate under second provision of 143 to hold that it is undesirable to try case summarily, a sentence of 1 year, more than 1 year may have to be passed. It is exercised after considering the further fact that apart from the sentence of imprisonment, the court has jurisdiction under 357(3) of CRPC to award suitable compensation with default sentence under 64 IPC and with further powers to recover under 431. So basically, if the court feels no, there is no need of summary trial, it is a regular trial. I'll give you a small example. Suppose there is an act of sale of goods, the payment has been made of 50,000, the check bounces. Summary trial. Second case, that the person induced the other side to give certain goods. The goods were given under impression that the accused is not accused, he is Mr. X, a renowned person, and by misguiding he has taken it. So it's a trial of cheating, fraud. So when the court feels that no, I need not go into it, there is no need of a separate trial for criminal breach of trust or fraud or cheating, and therefore it is not desirable to have a summary trial. We have to expand it. We have to see what are the other offenses. Then the provision is elaborated. You can enhance it, and there comes 357(3) where you can suitably compensate. It can be a classic case of cheating. Now it says, since evidence of the complaint can be given on affidavit, subject to court summoning the person giving affidavit and examining him, and the bank slip being prima facie evidence of the dishonest check, it is unnecessary for the magistrate to record any further preliminary evidence. Such evidence can be read as evidence at all stages. So, if the court feels no, I want to examine the complaint, there is something, there is a different issue. Otherwise, technically, post-summoning, pre-summoning, everything, this has to be done. And then the court says, in every complaint under 138 of the Act, it may be desirable that the complaint gives his bank account number and, if possible, email ID of the accused. If email is available with the bank where the accused has an account, such bank, on being required, should furnish such email ID to the payee of the check. Now, when we give 138 notice, I suggest that, since the court has clearly stated that if email ID is available with the bank where the accused has the account, such bank, on being required, should furnish the email ID to the payee of the check, not the court, payee of the check. So whenever we give notice, we can always write that in light of the judgment dated so and so passed by Honorable Supreme Court, citation, we request you to provide the email ID of the accused. This is when you don't have it. In every summon issued to the accused, it may indicate if the accused deposits a specified amount which should be assessed by the court having regard to the check amount and the interest and cost by a specified date, the accused need not appear unless required, and proceeding may be closed subject to any valid objection of the complainant. If the accused complies with the summons and informs the court and the complaint by email, the court can ascertain the objection, if any, of the complainant and close the proceeding unless it becomes necessary to proceed in the case. For example, he has only paid the principal amount. Then it's a different issue. The assessment is that, okay, for interest you want to continue, or he has paid partial amount, then it is there. In such a situation, the accused presence can be required unless the presence is otherwise exempted, subject to such conditions as may be considered appropriate. So accused presence may be exempted, and it generally it's a civil matter, so therefore accused is not required to remain present. The accused can, through advocate, make a counter case that I am outside Mumbai, or I am outside Delhi, and the case is in Mumbai or Delhi, whatever the case is, and I have to travel, and I undertake that whatever statements is made by the advocate will be binding upon me. It is open to the court to ask specific questions to the accused at that stage. Now here is the catch. It is open to the court to ask specific questions to the accused at that stage. In case the trial is to proceed, it will be open to the court to explore possibility of settlement. It will be open to the court to consider the provisions of plea bargaining. Subject to this, the trial can be on day-to-day basis, and endeavor must be to conclude it within 6 months. The guilty must be punished at the earliest, as per law, and the one who obeys the law need not be held up in proceeding for long unnecessarily. What happens today? The accused comes and says, "Sahib, I want to pay." We just say, "Oh, you want to pay? I'll refer you to Lok Adalat. I will refer you to mediation." Now that Lok Adalat will be after 6 months. The poor chap, the complainant, and as well as the accused have to come. Then it is compounded. So here it says at the earliest, which effectively means the moment the accused says, "Sir, I want to pay. I brought the demand draft," the case has to close. Court cannot, for its own benefit, and say that, okay, you go to the mediation room, or I will get points because I will refer to Lok Adalat. Very unfortunate that the judiciary is doing it. For their points, whenever we settle, they try to act as if it is mediation is done. When the matter is settled, there is no need of mediation. Mediation happens when the matter is not settled, or the Lok Adalat. If the matter is settled, there is no need of Lok Adalat. The purpose of Lok Adalat is totally defeated as of that date, because what they have made is a mechanism to get points and a mechanism to get promotions, which is not the purpose of law. So basically, the court has also clearly stated that it is open to the court to ask specific questions to the accused, which means that the moment the accused comes, he doesn't make payment, specific questions can be asked, and his cross-examination has to be based on 145(2). He has to give reasons why he could not have committed the offense for reasons and defenses. His scope of cross-examination would be limited to those under 145(2). He cannot ask the person, "What is your name? When did you join service? How much salary you are drawing? Whether you were there at the time when the goods were delivered?" All these are irrelevant questions which need not be asked. Now, I will show you a demo of one of our 138 matters, how we draft it, where things can be more smoother, more easier. And in fact, we say that if our complaint is there, no junior is required to even ask us a question. So this draft we have created, I'll just point out from page number 1 onwards. We are not giving the copies because we want all those who are attending, they should put in their efforts, read this, see this video. It will be uploaded on YouTube. The channel is The Law Club, and then you can note it and design it as per your needs. So what we have done is this. We have the first page which gives the details of the complainant. Now if you see, we write the details of the, whether it's a partnership form, the address, who is signing it, his age, gender, occupation, religion, whether he's an Indian or not, mobile number as well as email ID. So that the court, whenever they want, they can follow up with us. Now I've given here the accused details, which is the name of the company along with the address, the CIN number, GST number, email ID. And whenever there is whatever data was available, we have given. And thereafter, what we have done is we have prepared a checklist. Now, what this checklist done is this. Now, suppose you have a complaint through letter of authority or power of attorney. So whether it is there or not, original checks, which is mandatory, is there or not. So we write the page number. Whether original bank memo is there or not, whether the original demand note is there or not, original postal receipt is there or not, the original acknowledgement is there or not. Now, suppose we are attaching the tracking report, we write it, but since there is original, we say not applicable. Then we say reply of the accused. If yes, then we give the date. If not, then we give no. Original documents in the court returned. Now, this why we put it. Original document in the court returned after verification. If yes, then we type the name also. There itself we write. Suppose I have given it to Raman Lal Shah. So we write Raman Lal, or the staff can write Raman Lal Shah, put the date and get the sign. So process format given with the copy and envelopes. So what we do is we generally give the process also and the envelopes also, so that the court doesn't have to waste its time. So this is what index we prepare. So what we do is we write even the name of every accused. If you see, it is verses 1, 2, and 3. Then we give the information sheet, relevant fact sheet, complaint, then wakalatnama, then affidavit in lieu of examination in chief, compilation of documents, court fees, and affidavit in support. This is our master sheet. Now, if you go to court, generally what they do is they'll hand over you a sheet. Sir, you fill this. What is that sheet? Is it mandatory? No, it is not mandatory. That sheet is basically the sheet which is given by the judiciary to the court staff. They have to fill in that sheet. That sheet has to be given to the computer section, and that computer section will feed it. If they are not asking you, you will find that at times your details which are appearing in e-court website is totally faulty. We have seen that instead of Law Chamber of Siddharth Murarka, it says Law Chamber of Siddhartha Murarka. Murarka is given as Murarkar. Siddhartha is there instead of Siddharth. The name of, say, for example, Bharat becomes Bharti. Mr. Kiran becomes Mrs. Kiran. So all that, to sort it out, we realized we took in, and these forms which are there are unofficial. They are not binding. Lawyers cannot be forced to fill in the forms. These are to be done by the staff. But for our precaution, what we do is we prepare an information sheet. Now that is prepared after considering all the court forms which we are practicing: Daman, Vapi, Silvas, entire Mumbai city, Thana, Kalyan, Bhiwandi, Pune. We are practicing even in Navi Mumbai, Delhi, Calcutta. So all that we have incorporated. So information says details of the complainant, through whom we are filing. What is his designation? What is the authorization document? What is the address, email ID, mobile number, advocate for the complainant. Then our address comes, our contact number is given, Sanad number is given, even our email ID is given. Then the accused is there. Now we put in accused number 1, same details, accused number 2. So if you have one accused, you can say only accused. So you can renumbering it. We are numbering it because there are 3 accused. Wherever we don't have, see, if you see mobile number is dash. So we have put in, then we put in the police station. Now this police station, what we do is we search from the internet, the local police station, and we put it there. In fact, I think Lawyer Services has that police station diary also. So we require it because if we have summon, warrant or show cause, that everything has to go to the police station, and every time we have to search it. So what we have done is prepare in this itself the police station. We have put in the district, whatever mobile number, phone number we could get from the, directory. We call them up, confirm the number. Then we ask the number, email ID, mobile number of the PI. The PI number is there. His email ID is given. Then we have the, if suppose the warrant is issued, and usually we have that problem. Warrant is issued, no report comes in. So generally, if such thing happens, you have to issue a show cause notice to the police. And if then nothing happens, then you make an application for violation of court order under section 2B of Contempt of Court Act. So for all that, you require the additional superintendent of police, and if we have the website, we give it there. Then we prepare the relevant sheet. Now what we here do is that serial number, check number, check date, check number, and amount. The court fees which we have paid. We calculate the interim compensation also. Then the drawer bank and branch, drawee bank and branch, reason for the check return. Now remember, this has to be as it is. So if you are having funds insufficient, I small, then I small cap. Date of the memo, the police station, started to the police station has to be of the complainant's bank, Chandni Chowk. My bank is in Supreme Court. So Supreme Court bank branch, what is applicable, that has to be there. Statutory notice there. Then when he served, whether reply is there, if it is there, then the date. Cause of action. So if the cause of action is to be calculated, it's 15 days from the service of notice. Last date of filing of the case, complaint filed on. And if there is a delay, we write delay days and a separate an application. Technically, let me tell you, there is no provision of separate application for condonation of delay. What the law provides in negotiable instrument as is simply that you have to show the reason why there was delay, which you can put it in the complaint itself. So now what we have done, if you see, we have put in, we'll just scroll over a little. What we have done is the bank account maintained with, so that gives which bank, which branch, the police station, number of checks, because I have explained you that if it is one check, 1 year, two checks, 2 years, the value of the check. Then we have given bank account of the complainant for compounding under section 147 of NIAC, the name and the branch, account number, type of account, so current savings, IFC code. For compounding, interest at the rate 18% is to be taken from date of check till the date of realization. We have quoted the section because magistrates at times ask our juniors what is the section, he may not know. With the advocate cost, court fees to be calculated as per relief clause G. So we have made it very simple that in G we specify the basis on which the formula has to be derived. Now the complaint itself shows all the provision. Now if it is not the company, then 141 will be deleted. So we put in the name, address, etc. We give details of the complainant, details of the accused. Now these titles, what happens is that if you have the titles, you will never miss a clause. Otherwise, what happens when you go to court? The staff will say, "Sir, where is the limitation clause? Where is the court fee clause? Record that you have not made any other complaint." So all this we have covered in the complaint. So we write the details of the accused. Here, when we have written the accused, we clearly state that this is a private limited company and 2, 3 claim to be the director signatories. And remember, 141 clearly states that the accused must be responsible to and for the main company. So if you are not responsible to the company who's accused, you are not liable for the offense. So this statement, general statement, we are doing a government and we are giving the ROC extract. Now, since the ROC extract is a public document, we have put it annexure number because it needs no cross-examination. It's annexure number 1. And if you see, the original letter was annexure AB. So AB means that this has to be exhibited. This annexure 1 is only for the purpose of bringing public record. Now, details of the transaction, we put a brief detail of what has happened, then the details of the check. So, details of the check, we annex that copy. So, if it is a more than one check, you can make a table. If it is one bank, you can say all checks drawn on so-and-so bank, so-and-so branch. And if it is same dated, that all dated so-and-so. Otherwise, it has to be check number, serial number, check number, dated, amount. Then we have given the details of the bank memo. So you can have in the separate table where you add serial number, the check number, the date of the bank memo, and the reason. Now then we have the statutory notice where we have marked the statutory notice as well as we have given the postal receipts. Then we have details of the service. Now why we have done this is simple. Today what happens is when you are arguing a case or when the judge wants to see, he doesn't know which is F1, which is F2 and which is F3. Here we have clearly stated who is the accused, what is his address. Now if there are 2 addresses, we will have a second option and we will say the service status, whether it is returned, served, acknowledged, everything. and then we annex it. So if it is accused number 1 having 2 address, so we say, okay, accused number 1, first address, addressee left without instruction, and 2 notices served. Okay, so this is there. So we annex it and then we put it the annexation number. Then reply to the accused if any. So if it is there, we put in the details and then we counter here. Remember, if the accused has replied, you have to state that the statement is false. The statement makes by this accused is wrong, or the accused has admitted the liability but has short time. And the details of the offense. Detail of the offense is that the accused, even after has issued the checks, dishonored it, and has not complied with the requisitions of the statutory notice and have rendered themselves liable. So then we calculate the limitation. Now, limitation, at times if you will see, the court will ask you, how is it in limitation? Or the other side will dispute that you have to make the table, you have to point out. Instead, what we do is we make it very clear. We write every fact over here. Bank return memo date. So we also write it is Wednesday or Thursday, because if it is last day, say Sunday, limitation, a general clauses act provides you that it goes on the next day. So we write Wednesday, statutory notice date, then postal receipt date, date of service, reply, cause of action, last date, filed on. So whatever you saw on the top, that master sheet is also here. And then we write cause of action is within stipulated dates. If we have a delay condonation, here itself we write a reason. If you see the reason, the delay provision is under (142). We'll just see the delay provisions. Condonation of delay is under 145. So in that delay, it only talks about the reasons which has to be given for the purpose of delay in the matter. Here it is there. So 142, it is there. Now we write the reason over here, and we always say that there is no provision in law that you have to make out separate application for delay condonation. We have sufficiently explained the cause. Now jurisdiction is where your branch is, the complainant's bank branch. Now suppose I am at Delhi, I am the complainant. My bank branch, I open account at Chennai. The accused is at Mumbai. I deposit the check at, say, Guwahati. So where the branch is, it is at Delhi. So Delhi jurisdiction, where I have the main branch, that will have the jurisdiction. Now we have in Maharashtra, we have the court fee. So we deposit the court fee, and then the general clauses, we record that these number of accused are there. So we are giving you extra copies. We also record that we are having the best possible photocopies. We have given, we are undertaking to even seal the envelopes. If it is given, we record that we'll post it by BNPL. We record that if the summons is given, and we'll also send it by email from our office, though it is the court who has to send it. Then we give any typographical mistake in the notice, etc. be ignored and condoned, because what happens there may be a technical error. Then we have other proceedings and declaration. Here what we do is we disclose all the proceedings, whether it is civil, and here itself we write the complainant for the declared complaint has not filed any affidavit under 138 against the accused for this check or these checks, which is subject matter of this complaint. Now what separate affidavit they are talking about? They say that, okay, you file an affidavit that there are no other cases pending. All that we mention over here, and this complaint is supported by an affidavit in support. So we always say that, look here, the pleading is supported by affidavit, so there is no need of a separate affidavit. No, relief sought. So we record that on the same day you please issue the process, which is not necessary. But since the judiciary is not doing it, we record this. We say that this affidavit we read in both pre-summoning and post-summoning as per Indian banking judgments. We record that it be issued through police summons, we issued through police station. Then we record that this is Passport Act. Now, in fact, if there is a complaint, a criminal complaint pending against any accused under section 6(2) G of Passport Act, he can be refused immigration. So we request the court that under 2F you please pass an order. Then upon the accused remaining present, we say that please give the address, phone number, email ID. Then we say give us the 20% compensation. We also say bail bond should be at 40%, 50% of the amount, where naturally nobody will give 50%. And we say that the accused be given notice under 251 to enable him to have the defenses. And then we say that, okay, copy be directed to served upon the advocate 7 days in advance to enable us to cross-examine the accused. Then we say that if the accused wants to compound, then we clearly state that it has to be with 18% interest with effect from which date. Then we also state the court fees. We also say that we have charged, for, suppose here it is notice, drafting and filing charges is 40,000, 4,000 rupees is per hearing charges. So it's easy for the courts to calculate, and we give the actual figures. We don't elaborate, we do not exaggerate the figures. Whatever we have charged, we put that. And then we say if it is summary trial is rejected, and if there is a application under 145(2), then you please punish him with 2 years, not 1 year, and twice the amount of the check. We mention it as per check. Then we say that whether it is under summary trial or non-summary trial, please give us the compensation out of that. And we also say that please order compensation of the check amount with 18% as per section 80 read with 117A of the Negotiable Instrument Act. And then usually what happens if the accused is not there, court says please file an application for the warrant, bailable, non-bailable. Now this is waste of paper, waste of energy, and you give it, then the other side makes a say. We always record it, issue necessary arrest warrant against the accused for not remaining present on the day of the hearing without any application by the complainant, and based on the relief sought in this complaint itself, thereby saving paper and to ensure that the accused does not enjoy the fruits of his own wrong. Now, since Maharashtra has court fee, we say that because in court fees, they say make out an application, file a separate application, formal application for refund. All this we say no, as per the circumstance, please give it. And then we close it. Now, this comes the verification clause. In verification, what happens usually I've seen is that everything is based on my, based to the best of my knowledge. And further it says that it is based on documents, which is not the correct approach. The purpose of verification is to record what is based on your own knowledge. So what we have divided is there are 3 categories. So we have divided into 3 Roman paras. What is stated in 1 to 8 and 15 are true to my knowledge and based on records of the complainant, to personal knowledge, and which I believe to be true and correct. Now, what is recorded in para 9 to 14 are legal submission. For example, jurisdiction, limitation. These are legal submission a litigant will never know. So which is based on legal submission which are advised by the advocate and which I believe it to be true and correct. And then we say what is stated in para students, so the relief clause. All the above I believe it to be true and correct. And then we further record I have not concealed any material fact from this court. I have taken copies of original documents myself, compared the same and have attached the same. So this, if you lose your original, the secondary evidence is ready for you. Then we have the Wakalatnama. After the Wakalatnama, we do is the evidence affidavit in lieu of examination in chief. Please remember a few things. What above paragraphs which I have stated in verification, whatever was the legal submission will never come in the affidavit. Lawyers usually reproduce the entire complaint and instead of the complainant state that they put it, I say that. That is not the purpose of evidence. The evidence has to be documents which you want to prove. So what we do is basically we record the complaint, and then in the complaint we also say that whether the document, how we have got it, for example, check, whether the check, we know the signatures or we don't know the signature. We clearly state that. For example, here you say, I say the check bears the signature of one of the directors, authorized person of number 1. I cannot identify the signature. We also say the contents of the check is true and correct. I am in possession of the original. I hereby tender the same. Here to annex is the original dishonored check. I say that same be taken on record and marked exhibit. So the complaint is different. Complaint does not say that this is, I am hereby tendering the document. It does not say the contents are true and correct. It does not say who has signed it. So all this, we again paragraph it as basically evidence. What we do is we do not do anything except the check, details of the complainant, and then in the complaint we say that the complaint be treated as part of the evidence. Then we directly go to the check. We directly go to the bank memo. Same we say that we are not involved in the communication between the banks of the accused and complainant. And then what we do is we give the details of statutory notice. We identify who has drafted the advocate, who has drafted the complaint, and who has signed the complaint, the advocate's name. And then we also have the postal receipt. Now we have the BNPL account, so we record all that. Then details of service, if you see, we have again created the tabular form, details of reply and other statements. We say that, okay, we are producing these documents, that I crave to leave, file additional affidavit if required, and list of documents, if at all, 145(2) is allowed. And then the verification, because this has to be as per knowledge only. You cannot have anything which is third-party information. And we prepare the list of the documents. Here we also prepare the summons, and we also keep the warrants ready. So the moment the brief is prepared, we have this warrant copy ready against all the accused. Now your company cannot be arrested, so accused number 2 and 3, bailable, non-bailable, to the senior inspector. Now you can even write the police station address, and then we leave the court number blank, we leave the amounts blank, and then we leave the date blank and court number blank. So the idea is that what we do is we create this and we keep it in the folder. The moment the accused does not come, we say, sir, look at clause number so and so of our complaint. We have already made an application for arrest. The moment he allows it, we across the bar give this copy and say, sir, please fill in the details, because this is extracted from the formats itself. So basically when they say that, okay, warrant, we have a separate format, that is incorrect. It has to be as per the criminal manual. So we keep it ready, though many courts do not accept this, but this is, if all lawyers try to do it, it will be excellent. We prepare the formats, we keep everything ready, and technically, if you ask me, the courts are totally at fault. One, I'll repeat, the sheet of filing is faulty. I have given you the sheet. The purpose is to ensure that all data is proper. The affidavit of no other case is not required. I have demonstrated that I have recorded no other cases filed. It is supported by an affidavit. Then the 200 and 202 separate affidavits are not required. There is no provision of 311 for recalling the witness. If you have not made out a case, or if it is rejected, magistrates cannot say, no, 145(2) is not allowed. Now I will allow under 311. If you allow, you have to show, record why the witness is required. If you allow 145(2), it has to be a reasoned order. I have pointed out that if 145(2) is not there, it cannot be, the cross-examination is not direct. I have pointed out that the complainant is not required to remain present in the court unless an application is made under 145(2), which also has to be for reasons and defenses. I have pointed out the Supreme Court judgment. I have pointed out if there is a second case, then the same magistrate, you need not go to CMM or the High Court, same magistrate, even if it is say Calcutta and Delhi, that same magistrate has to direct the transfer of the matter. Now comes the important point, the punishment. If you read the entire judgments, I have been reading it for last several years, not a single judgment says that we have 5 checks. Instead of granting 5 years imprisonment, I am granting 6 months. For what reason? The magistrates at random grant you, you'll see the same magistrate granting Monday morning is granting 6 months, Tuesday morning 9 months, at randomly whatever he wants. So technically, this is not a proper system. He has to give reasons why he is reducing the maximum prescribed period. Unless that is done, the same is not a good order. So technically, I have tried to cover up all 138 proceedings. I have pointed out the Supreme Court judgment and how our magistrates are violating those judgments. We agree that right now the judiciary is not doing as required under law, and I pointed out that there is a lacuna which needs to be capped. There is a Supreme Court matter where suo motu, the court has issued summons on the facts which we have pointed out. We have recorded in a letter. We have given these 2 judgments. We have even given that RBI must be given a notice. So every check which is dishonored, there should be details of the accused, his mobile number, his address, his email ID, so that there are no revisions maintainable. So when whoever is the signatory, all the details are before the court before issuing of process. 202 is not required. Now all that is considered by Supreme Court, and with this I rest my case.